We need to be firm in our adherence to the charge that we've been given or the promises that we have made. It means to be firm in adherence to duty and responsibilities. Again, keeping the charge. It means to be loyal, conscientious, and true to the facts. True to the facts. And that's going to become important, some things I say in a minute. To be true to the facts. That's what it means to be faithful. That you give a right report of the facts that are presented. This is what we hope that a prosecuting attorney is. Faithful. True to the facts. This is what we hope that when someone is a witness, that they are being faithful. They're being true to the facts. They're not turning the thing to the right hand or to the left. They're saying it exactly as the way it's supposed to be. This is one of the definitions of faithful. And this is what it is to be required of God to be faithful. He's requiring us to be true to the facts. He's requiring us that we would have a firm adherence to the promises that we've made. He's requiring our affection. He's requiring our allegiance, our loyalty. He's requiring that we would be conscientious of Him in the carrying out of our duties. And that's what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 4. The foundation of faithfulness is fidelity. We need to be faithful. That's the bottom line. Fidelity is just a simple way to say faithfulness. We must first maintain our fidelity and loyalty to God as His stewards. That means that we realize that He ultimately is the one in charge. He is the one ultimately we must give an account to. Everything else is secondary. Yes, you may put Paul in a basket and send him over a wall. You may beat him with rods. You may beat him. You may stone him. You may do all these things in trying to influence him in his message. But the bottom line is this. He is conscientious of God at all times. And he realizes that these beatings, these afflictions are but for a moment. This is a terrible consideration that we will shortly have to give an account to God. It ought to anchor our hearts. Hear what I'm saying. It ought to anchor our hearts in the presence of the sons of Babylon. Because there are many. There are many. There were in Paul's day. There were in Zerubbabel's day. And there is in our day. And there's always going to be this pressure to compromise. There's always going to be this pressure to veer off from the facts and to not to be faithful to the stewardship of the mystery and the message that God has given us. But we have to be faithful. It's required of us. Zerubbabel was in charge of the project, but he did not understand the seriousness of what he was actually doing. These visions were for him a great revelation. See, Zerubbabel was looking at these things and saying, I don't know, what do these things mean? And God exposed to him or revealed to him these facts. And I want to change gears for just a minute, and I want to talk about stewardship and how this ultimately plays out in our lives. And I want to talk about it through the life of Joseph. The Lord has really just been spending a lot of my devotional time looking at the life of Joseph. Tremendous story. Tremendous story in his life. I think he's probably the greatest story of stewardship in all of the Old Testament. It's an amazing, amazing life that he lived. He was born to the wife that Jacob had worked 14 years to have, Rachel, of course. He knew that Rachel was the God-ordained perfect wife for him, but of course he was his father-in-law, and he had to take Leah to be his first wife. Rachel bore Jacob 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. She died giving birth to Benjamin. Jacob, or Israel as he's also known, had 10 other sons that were seemingly, and this is important, seemingly always in mischief, always doing something that would not be pleasant either to their father or to God. And understand that Joseph oftentimes was sent out to bring back a report of how his brothers were doing. And he would bring back a true and faithful report. And that's not always popular, is it? You see, it's not about whether you bring a good report or a bad report. It's about bringing a faithful report. You see what I'm saying? Because the pressure is always to bring a good report, depending on the crowd. Now, you may have a crowd who's very negative, and they always want a bad report. But the fact is, it's our responsibility to bring a faithful report. What are the true facts in the case? That's the question. And we need to realize that. And Joseph was faithful to bring this report, even though he knew it was going to bring about the wrath of his 11, or at least 10 of his 11 other brothers. It was going to bring about the wrath of them. It was going to cause perhaps his father to think less of them. But nevertheless, these people ultimately became what we would know as the 12 tribes of Israel. They hated him because he was truthful. They wanted to live their lives, watch this, they wanted to live their lives like infidels, but they didn't want their father knowing how they really lived. How many of you know people like that? Now, you don't have to raise your hand. How discouraging is it to you in your life? It doesn't mean that anyone is perfect. But there is a difference between people who brazenly, in front of people who would be the one to bring a report, try to live one way, and then they have a totally separate life that they really truly lead. It's a terrible way to be. But Joseph was the type of person that he would bring a true report. And these people didn't like this at all. He would bring a faithful report of what was going on. Joseph also had insight from God in the form of dreams and interpretations of dreams. And though Joseph was a very humble man, his dreams, of course, created even more trouble for him. I believe that Jacob saw in his son his own personal error. And because of that, he gave him this coat of many colors. You think his brothers liked that? They didn't like that either, did they? You see, people don't like it when they see God's favor on your life. But we're going now back all the way back to the story of Cain. It is not because Joseph was special that he had the coat of many colors. It wasn't any of these things. It was because of the fact that he chose what was right, and he did what was right, and his father honored him, I believe, in what he was doing. And no doubt, God honored him in all that he did. He was a faithful steward. He was faithful in little. Watch how this plays out. When he was a young boy, he was faithful, even though he was smaller than them, even though he was little and his brothers were grown. He was faithful to come bring a right report, even though he knew he would have to face off with his brothers in the field. He knew that. He was faithful in little, and God was going to prepare him to be faithful in much. You see, this is an axiom of Scripture. Oftentimes, if we would just be faithful in little, God would give us charge over much more. God would. He would give us charge over much more. You look at his life, you see how unpopular he became. He was very humble, but he had dreams. His brothers despised his dreams. He was given a coat of many colors. All these things fomented an anger and a hatred of Joseph. Solomon said these words. He said, "Love is as strong as death, and jealousy is as cruel as the grave." They were jealous of their brother. And that jealousy drove them to do things that are mind-boggling. How could you possibly sell your own brother into slavery? How could you plot to kill your own brother? How could you strip him of his coat, dip it in blood, and then take it back to their father, who had sent Joseph off in the first place, and say, "Wild animals have devoured your son," causing their father to think, "I have sent him to his death," making his father think for the next 20 years that he had sent his own son out to check on them, and that's why he was killed. How many times did he ask himself, "Why did I send him?" You see, this is the cruelty of jealousy. And the cruelty of jealousy over somebody who's trying to live a righteous life and live holy. The Lord was the recipient of all kinds of this type of cruelty over and over again. They wanted to kill him, but instead they sold him into Egypt as a slave. They brought his coat back blood-stained to their father and asked them, "Is this your son's coat?" What a cruel thing to say. Do you spot that when you read those things? Is this your son's coat? Why didn't they say, this looks like our brother's coat?